The family had gathered around the festive table in their new apartment when the husband ceremoniously raised his glass and declared, "To Mom, who's moving in tomorrow." The mother-in-law beamed with happiness, anticipating her move in with the young couple. But the daughter-in-law wasn't quick to share in the general joy. Instead, she calmly took out her phone and played a recording of a conversation, which instantly altered the celebratory atmosphere. "Greetings, dear listeners. I'm delighted to welcome you to my channel. I present to you a new intriguing story. Enjoy listening." Xenia woke up each morning with the thought that this was temporary. Soon, she and Artyom would find their own place, move out of his mother's apartment, and finally lead a normal family life. 3 years passed. The temporary had become permanent, and hope had become a habit. Ninel Georgievna would greet her every evening at the threshold with the expression of someone who had stumbled upon a burglar. She would inspect grocery bags, comment on purchases, and sigh over the prices. Quote 1. Xenia remained silent, put the groceries away, and prepared dinner. Ninel Georgievna would sit in the kitchen and observe like a warden. Artyom would arrive later, tired, hungry, kiss his mother's cheek, Xenia's forehead, and sit down to eat. He spoke little. After dinner, he would retreat to his room, lost in his phone. Ninel Georgievna would remain with Xenia in the kitchen, recounting tales about neighbors, prices, and how difficult it was for her to be alone. Her husband had passed away 10 years ago, and since then, she had lived for her son, and only for him. When Xenia became pregnant, her mother-in-law was initially delighted, then began offering advice on what to eat, what to drink, how to sleep, and which doctors to consult. Xenia tried to resist, but Ninel Georgievna had a knack for becoming offended in such a way that Artyom would be morose for 2 weeks. It was easier to nod and do things her own way in secret. Liza was born in April, tiny, noisy, and beautiful. Xenia fell instantly and unconditionally in love with her. Ninel Georgievna also fell in love, but in her own way deciding that the child was now her responsibility. She would snatch Liza from Xenia's arms, rock her, sing songs, and feed her from a bottle while Xenia pumped milk. "You rest," her mother-in-law would say. "I'll manage." And she would take their daughter to her room. Xenia would be left alone, listening to the crying from beyond the wall and clenching her fists. Artyom worked as a manager in a construction company, earning around $80,000. Xenia was on maternity leave, with no income of her own. Every time Xenia asked for something for Liza, Ninel Georgievna would sigh and get out her purse. "Here, take it, but be thrifty. Artyom needs to save for a down payment." Xenia would take the money, express her gratitude, and then hate herself for it. One evening, when Liza was 6 months old, Ninel Georgievna was in the kitchen with her neighbor Lyudmila. Xenia was in the bathroom, bathing their daughter. The door was ajar, and the voices from the kitchen were clearly audible. "So, how do you find living with your daughter-in-law?" Lyudmila asked. "What can I say?" Ninel Georgievna sighed. "We get by. She tries, of course, but she's not a proper housekeeper. She cooks poorly, doesn't clean up after herself, and always forgets something. Artyom adores her, but I see they're not a match. He's so smart, successful, and she's ordinary. She had a baby, and that's it. Now she's living off him." Xenia froze, holding Liza in her arms. Water dripped from the child's small body. The girl giggled, clapping her tiny hands. Quote 8. Lyudmila chuckled. Quote 9. Xenia wrapped Liza in a towel, left the bathroom, walked past the kitchen without glancing at her mother-in-law, placed her daughter in the crib, sat beside her, and stared into the darkness. Everything inside her burned. The next day, she began searching for a job. She found an opening for an administrator at a medical center, part-time, for $35,000. She accepted immediately. Ninel Georgievna stayed with Liza. Xenia left in the mornings and returned by lunchtime. Her mother-in-law would greet her with a displeased expression. Liza cried for half the day. Quote 10. Ksenia would pick up her daughter, kiss her, hold her close, and remain silent. She saved every penny, didn't buy anything unnecessary for herself, and refused coffee at work, continuing to wear her old jacket. 6 months later, she had $20,000 in her account. A year later, $60,000. Artyom never asked where her salary went. He rarely asked about anything. A silence fell between them. They didn't argue, but they didn't share their deepest thoughts either. Artyom spent more and more time with his mother, discussing work, plans, and news. Ksenia was somewhere nearby, but as if behind glass. She stopped feeling resentful. She simply saved and waited. One day, Artyom came home excited, his eyes alight, and announced that he had been promoted. He was now the head of department with a salary of $120,000. Ninel Georgievna threw her hands up, embraced her son, and showered him with kisses. Ksenia congratulated him, smiling. Artyom looked at her. Now we can get a mortgage, find an apartment, and move out. No more living off Mom. Ksenia nodded. Something inside her snapped. He spoke as if they had made a joint decision to live with his mother, as if it were a shared problem, not his inability to separate. They began searching for an apartment, viewing options on weekends, traveling to different districts. Ninel Georgievna inquired each time about what they had seen, the prices, and the number of rooms. She offered advice on which areas were better, which were cheaper. Once, she said, "Don't get too large an apartment so there's a room for me. I'll be moving in with you." Artyom laughed. "Mom, we're just moving out from your place." Ninel Georgievna took offense. "Am I bothering you? I've dedicated my whole life to you and you're abandoning me. Fine. Live as you wish." She went to her room, slamming the door. Artyom sighed. Ksenia remained silent. A week later, they found an apartment. A 3-bedroom in a new building on the 5th floor, nicely renovated, for $4,200,000. The down payment was $1 million. Ksenia had $120,000 and Artyom had $300,000. The rest Ninel Georgievna promised to provide. "I'll sell the dacha," she said. "I don't go there anyway. I'd rather help you." Artyom hugged his mother and thanked her. Ksenia also thanked her, but a chill spread through her. The deal was completed quickly. Ninel Georgievna sold the dacha for $650,000, added from her savings, and handed over the money. The apartment was now theirs. Artyom was radiant. Ksenia remained silent as they prepared for the move, buying furniture, appliances, and dishes. Ksenia chose everything herself but consulted Ninel Georgievna each time. The latter would criticize her choices, suggest her own, and get offended if she wasn't listened to. Artyom urged Ksenia to be accommodating. Quote 17. One evening, Ninel Georgievna came into the kitchen where Ksenia was washing dishes. Her mother-in-law sat at the table, silent for a long time, then said, Quote 18. Ksenia turned, looking at her mother-in-law. Quote 19. Separately. The mother-in-law frowned. Quote 20. Quote 21. Quote 22. Ninel Georgievna stood up and walked closer. Quote 23. Ksenia wiped her hands and turned to face her mother-in-law. Quote 24. Quote 25. The mother-in-law cut in and left the kitchen. Ksenia stood by the sink, looking out the window. Darkness was falling outside, and a knot tightened in her chest. The next day, Ninel Georgievna spoke with Artyom. Ksenia could hear the conversation from the hallway. Her mother-in-law was crying, saying she was being abandoned, that she had devoted her life to her son, and now he was throwing her out. Artyom tried to soothe her, saying no one was throwing her out. Ksenia entered the room. Artyom looked at his wife in surprise. Ninel Georgievna also stared at her, wiping away tears. The mother-in-law erupted. Artyom stood up and walked over to Ksenia. Quote 35, quote 36. Ninel Georgievna started crying louder. Artyom looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Quote 37, quote 38, quote 39. Artyom sighed and waved his hand. Quote 40. Ninel Georgievna sobbed, got up, and went to her room. Ksenia remained alone. Her hands trembled, but inside, she felt relief. They moved at the end of August. The new apartment smelled of paint and wood, bright, spacious, with large windows. Ksenia walked through the rooms, touching the walls, unable to believe it was their home. Artyom carried boxes, assembled furniture, and joked. Liza ran through the empty rooms, laughing. For the first time in a long time, Ksenia felt she could breathe freely. Ninel Georgievna visited every weekend, brought food, checked on their lives, and offered advice. Artyom was pleased. Ksenia endured. Her mother-in-law would stay late, and one day she stayed overnight. Quote 41. Artyom agreed immediately. Ksenia remained silent. Ninel Georgievna began staying more often, sometimes for one night, sometimes for two. Artyom didn't object. Ksenia gritted her teeth. One day, her mother-in-law said, "What if I just move in with you? My apartment is empty there, and I'm here with my granddaughter, with you. It's more convenient." Artyom looked at Ksenia, who shook her head. "Ninel Georgievna, let's keep it like this for now. You visit whenever you want, but you live in your own place." "Understood," the mother-in-law replied curtly. "I'm bothering you." "You're not bothering us, we just need some space." Ninel Georgievna took offense and left, not calling for a week. Then she reappeared as if nothing had happened. Ksenia was tired of her mother-in-law's constant presence, of Artyom's inability to see the problem, of feeling like a stranger in her own home again. One day, Ninel Georgievna arrived with large bags, saying she had brought things to leave at their place so she wouldn't have to carry them each time. Her mother-in-law unpacked her belongings in the guest room closet, hung a robe on a hook in the bathroom, and placed slippers by the door. Artyom didn't notice. Ksenia did. 2 weeks later, Ninel Georgievna announced she wanted to surprise them. She wanted to host a festive dinner in their new apartment, invite friends, and celebrate the housewarming. Artyom was delighted and agreed. Ksenia nodded. Her mother-in-law took charge of the arrangements, ordered food, invited guests, and set the table. That evening, about 10 people gathered. Artyom's colleagues, his cousins with their wives, and the neighbor Lyudmila. Ninel Georgievna flitted around the apartment, accepting compliments and recounting how they had chosen the apartment and how she had helped financially. Ksenia sat at the table, smiling, answering questions. At one point, Artyom stood up, a glass in his hand. Quote 47. The guests buzzed and clapped. Ninel Georgievna beamed, nodding, accepting congratulations. Ksenia froze, looking at her husband. He was smiling, raising his glass. She said quietly. Ksenia repeated. Ninel Georgievna stood up and walked over to her. Ksenia took out her phone and started the recording. The voices blared clearly into the entire room. Quote, 53, quote 54, quote 55, quote 56. The guests fell silent. Ninel Georgievna turned pale. Artyom looked at the phone, then at his mother. The recording continued. Quote 57, quote 58. Ksenia turned off the recording, placed the phone on the table, and looked at her mother-in-law. Ninel Georgievna opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Ksenia asked quietly. Artyom stood up, his face bewildered. Ksenia said. Ksenia's voice grew louder. For me to remain a grateful fool who is eternally indebted. So you could move in here and boss everyone around as if it were your own apartment? Ninel Georgievna began to cry. Artyom, say something to her. She's insulting me. Artyom remained silent, looking at his mother, then at his wife, unsure what to say. The guests sat, heads bowed over their plates. Leave, Ksenia said. This is my home, Artyom's and mine, and I don't want to see you here. Ninel Georgievna sobbed, grabbed her bag, and ran out of the apartment. The door slammed shut. The guests began to awkwardly say their goodbyes and leave. 10 minutes later, only Ksenia and Artyom remained in the apartment. He sat at the table, staring into an empty glass. Ksenia cleared the dishes, not looking at her husband. "Why did you do that?" he finally asked. "So you could hear the truth. She's my mother, I know, but I'm your wife." Artyom stood up, walked to the window, and remained silent for a long time, then said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't know she spoke like that." "Now you do." She turned and looked at him. "What now?" "Now we live on our own. Without her." Artyom nodded. "Okay." Ksenia didn't believe him at first. She expected him to change his mind, for Ninel Georgievna to return, cry, and play the victim. But her mother-in-law didn't call. Artyom visited her once a week, alone, without Ksenia. He returned silent, but he didn't ask for his wife's forgiveness. A month passed. Artyom started picking Liza up from kindergarten, cooking dinners, and helping around the house. Ksenia returned to work full-time. They began to talk not about trivial matters, but about real things, about feelings, fears, and what had happened. Ninel Georgievna called one day and apologized. Ksenia accepted the apology but didn't invite her over. Artyom visited his mother, sometimes taking Liza. Ksenia stayed home, enjoying the quiet. One evening, they sat in the kitchen together, drinking tea. Outside, the cherry trees were blooming, and the air smelled fresh. Artyom looked at his wife. "You know, I'm grateful to you for that recording. If it weren't for it, I would never have understood." Ksenia smiled. "I carried it on my phone for 3 years, waiting for the moment. You're always so patient, yet impatient. You just knew the moment would come." Artyom hugged his wife and kissed the top of her head. Ksenia closed her eyes and nestled against him. For the first time in a long time, she was truly home.